The Darkest Minds by Alexandra Bracken. When the white noise went off, we were in the garden pulling weeds. I always reacted badly to it. It didn't matter if I was outside, eating in the mess hall, or locked in my cabin. When it came, the shrieking tones blew up like a pipe bomb between my ears. Other girls at Thurman could pick themselves up quickly after a few minutes, shaking off the nausea and disorientation like the loose grass clinging to their camp uniforms. But me? Hours would pass before I was able to piece myself back together. This time should have been no different, but it was. I didn't see what happened to provoke the punishment. We were working so close to the camp's electric fence that I could smell the singed air and feel the voltage it shed vibrating in my teeth. Maybe someone got brave and decided to step out of the garden's bounds. Or maybe, dreaming big, someone fulfilled all our fantasies and threw a rock at the head of the nearest PSI Special Forces soldier. That would have been worth it. The only thing I knew for certain was that the overhead speakers spurted out two warning blares, one short, one long. The skin on my neck crawled as I leaned forward into the damp dirt, hands pressed tightly against my ears, shoulders tense to take the hit. The sound came over the speakers, wasn't really white. It wasn't that weird buzz that the air sometimes takes on when you're sitting alone in silence, or the faint hum of a computer monitor. To the United States government and its Department of PSI Youth, it was the love child of a car alarm and dental drill, turned up high enough to make your ears bleed. Literally. The sound ripped out of the speakers and shredded every nerve in my body. It forced its way past my hands, roaring over the screams of 100 teenage freaks, and settled at the center of my brain, where I couldn't reach in and rip it out. My eyes flooded with tears. I tried to ram my face into the ground. All I could taste in my mouth was blood and dirt. A girl fell forward next to me, her mouth open in a cry I couldn't hear. Everything else faded out of focus. My body shook in time and with bursts of static, curling in on itself like an old, yellowing piece of paper. Someone's hands were shaking my shoulders. I heard someone say my name, Ruby, but I was too far gone to respond. Gone, 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 sinking until there was nothing, like the earth had swallowed me up in a single deep breath, then darkness and silence. Chapter 1. Grace Summerfield was the first to die. The first in my fourth grade class, at least. I'm sure that by then, thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of kids had already up and gone the same way she had. People were slow to piece it all together, or at least they'd figured out the right way to keep us dark long after the kids started dying. When the deaths finally came to light, my elementary school put a strict ban on teachers and staff talking to us about what was then called Everhart's disease, after Michael Everhart, the first kid known to have died of it. Soon someone, somewhere, decided to give it a proper name, idiopathic adolescent acute neurodegeneration, IAAN for short. And then it wasn't just Michael's disease, it was all of ours. All the adults I knew buried the knowledge beneath lying smiles and hugs. I was still stuck in my own world of sunshine ponies and my race car collection. Looking back, I couldn't believe how naive I was, just how many clues I missed. Even big things like when my dad, a cop, started working longer hours and could barely stand to look at me when he finally did come home. My mom started me on a strict vitamin regimen and refused to let me be alone, even for a few minutes. On the other hand, my parents were both only children. I didn't have any dead cousins to send up red flags, and my mom's refusal to let my dad install a soul-sucking vortex of trash and mindless entertainment, that thing commonly known as television, meant that no scary news broadcast rocked in my world. This combined with the CIA-grade parental controls set up on our internet access pretty much ensured I'd be far more concerned with how many stuffed animals were arranged on my bed than the possibility of dying before my 10th birthday. I was completely unprepared for what happened on the 15th of September. It had rained the night before, so my parents sent me to school wearing red galoshes. In class, we talked about dinosaurs and practiced cursive before Mrs. Port dismissed us for lunch with her usual look of relief. I remember every detail of lunch that day clearly, not because I was sitting across from Grace at the table, but because she was the first, and because it wasn't supposed to happen. She wasn't old like Grandpops had been. She didn't have cancer like Mom's friend Sarah. No allergies, no cough, no head injury, nothing. When she died, it came completely out of the blue, and none of us understood what it had meant until it was too late. Grace was locked in a deep debate about whether a fly was trapped inside her Jell-O cup. The red mass shivered as she waved it around, inching out over the edge of the container when she squeezed it a bit too tight. Naturally, everyone wanted to give their opinion on whether it was a fly or a piece of candy Grace had pushed in there, including me. "I'm not a liar," Grace said. "I just—" She stopped. The plastic cup slipped from her fingers, hitting the table. Her mouth was open, eyes fixed on something just beyond my head. Grace's brow was furrowed, almost as if she was listening to someone explain something very difficult. "Grace?" I remember saying. "Are you okay?" Her eyes rolled back, flashing white in the second it took her eyelids to droop down. Grace let out a small sigh, not even strong enough to blow away the strands of brown hair stuck to her lips. All of us sitting nearby froze, though we must have had the same exact thought. She's fainted. A week or two before, Josh Preston had passed out on the playground because, as Miss Port explained, he didn't have enough sugar in his system, something stupid like that. A noon aide rushed over to the table. She was one of four old ladies with white visors and whistles who rotated lunch and playground duty during the week. I have no idea if she had any medical certifications beyond the vague notion of CPR, but she pulled Grace's sagging body to the ground all the same. She had a rapt audience as she pressed her ear to Grace's hot pink t-shirt, listening for a heartbeat that wasn't there. I don't know what the old lady thought, but she started yelling, and suddenly white visors and curious faces circled in on us. It wasn't until Ben Cho nudged Grace's limp hand with his sneaker that any of us realized she was dead. The other kids started screaming. One girl, Tess, was crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Small feet stampeded toward the cafeteria door. I just sat, surrounded by abandoned lunches, staring at the cup of jello and letting out a terror crawl through me until my arms and legs felt like they would be frozen to the table forever. If the school security officer hadn't come and carried me outside, I don't know how long I would have stayed there. Grace is dead, I was thinking. Grace is dead? Grace is dead. And it got worse. A month later, after the first big waves of death, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a 5-step list of symptoms to help parents identify whether their kids were at risk for IAAN. By then, half my class was dead. My mom hid the list so well that I only found out by accident when I climbed on top of the kitchen counter to look for the chocolate she kept hidden there behind her baking supplies. How to identify if your child is at risk, the flyer read. I recognized the flaming orange shade of the paper. It was the sheet Mrs. Port had sent home with her few remaining students days before. She had folded it twice and fastened it with 3 staples to prevent our reading. To the parents of Ruby only was written on the outside and underlined 3 times. 3 times was serious. My parents would have grounded me for opening it. Luckily for me, it was already open. 1. Your child suddenly becomes sullen and withdrawn and or loses interest in activities they previously enjoyed. 2. She/he begins to have abnormal difficulty in concentrating or suddenly becomes hyper-focused on tasks, resulting in he/she losing track of time and or neglecting him/herself or others. 3. She/he experiences hallucinations, vomiting, chronic migraines, memory loss, and or fainting spells. 4. She/he becomes prone to violent outbursts, unusually reckless behavior, or self-injury, burns, bruising, and cuts that cannot be explained. 5. She/he develops behaviors or abilities that are inexplicable, dangerous, or cause you or others physical harm. If your child demonstrates any of the above symptoms, register him/her at iaan.gov and wait to be contacted about the local hospital to which he/she should be taken. When I finished reading the flyer, I folded it back up neatly, put it exactly where I found it, and threw up in the sink. Grams phoned later that week, and in her usual to-the-point Grams way explained everything to me. Kids were dying left and right, all about my age, but doctors were working on it, and I wasn't supposed to be afraid, because I was her granddaughter, and I would be fine. I should be good and tell my parents if I felt anything weird, understand? Things turned from bad to terrifying very fast. A week after, 3 of the 4 kids in my neighborhood were buried, and the president made a formal address to the nation. Mom and Dad watched a live stream on the computer, and I listened from outside the office door. My fellow Americans, President Gray began, today we face a devastating crisis, one that threatens not only our children's lives, but the very future of our great nation. May it comfort you to know that in our time of need, we in Washington are developing programs both to support the families affected by this horrid affliction and the children blessed enough to survive it. I wish I could have seen his face as he spoke, because I think he knew, he must have, that this threat, to crimp in our supposedly glorious future, had nothing to do with the kids who had died. Buried underground or burned into ash, they couldn't do anything but haunt the memories of the people who had loved them. They were gone, forever. And that symptoms list, the one that was sent home folded and stapled by teachers, which was aired hundreds of times over the news as the faces of the dead scrolled along the bottom of the screen, the government was never scared of the kids who might die, or the empty spaces they would leave behind. They were afraid of us, the ones who lived.